We are on lesson 8 of Revelation.
Still trying.
Part 2. And we are laughing because we have had to turn the video on and on and on. But we will get there. So as we were doing our review, I will go back through some of that review for the class here, but we are looking at the things that will take place after these things in the third segment division of Revelation. Okay, so this week, as we looked at, the last 2 lessons, we looked at the chart on the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. Okay, so you became a little bit more familiar with those. Some of what we learned as we did those charts are the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. Are they the same things, just restated? No, they are not the same event, just restated. They are, what would we say about them? They're all separate, and they're
one
sequence. Thank you. Sequencing, one leads to the next one. It's a progress, right? If you remember when I had seals, and we had how many seals? 7. How many trumpets? 7. How many bowls? 7. Okay. As we got to the end of when we got to the end of the seals, on the 7th seal, what came out of the 7th seal? The 7 trumpets, right? And what came out of the 7th trumpet? The 7 bowls. Okay, so basically if you collapsed the bowls back into the 7th trumpet and then collapsed the 7th trumpet back into the 7th seal, then you had the 7th seal is basically all of the rest of them as well, right? And one of the big major points that we needed to point out is who broke the seals? Jesus. Jesus is bringing every bit of this about, very directly, not indirectly. He is bringing this about. What is he breaking the seals on?
A scroll.
A scroll or a book, sometimes our translation, but it would be most literally a scroll. So as he broke each one of those seals, when it got to that 7th seal, what would have happened to that scroll? It would have opened up completely, and we would have seen the rest. This book is extremely significant. I'm kind of going backwards, but this book is extremely significant because when John sees the scene in heaven, he sees, and he describes it for us, there's a point where there is a lamb who comes in, is standing by the throne, the one who sits on the throne. We know the one who sits on the throne is God. The lamb, in the description, we understand the lamb is Jesus, right? Okay, so as Jesus is the lamb and is standing there, and in his description, we also then see a book or the scroll in the hand, the right hand of the one who sits on the throne. And the lamb does what? Takes the book out of the hand. Doesn't grab it, doesn't, he takes it because he can. It's essentially given to him to take. Because why?
He's the only one worthy to break.
He's the only one found in heaven or earth worthy to take the book and to open its seals, break its seals, and to open the book. John, there's a significance to him crying as he sees the book, and that significance, as Kay was talking about it even last week, is what is this book and what is the importance of it? If nothing else we know, it's important. She calls it possibly the title deed to earth. It's the right that we lost as humans in the garden through Adam and Eve, to being those who care for and have dominion over the earth. That is being taken back. It's being taken back by the one who is worthy and the one who became like us. He is human and he's God. And he became like us and has the ability to take that back. Now he's breaking those seals. But as he broke those seals, events happen. At the 7th seal and the trumpets come out, events happen. As the 7th trumpet happens and the bowls are given, events happen. Right? In the conclusion of the final bowl, or in the bowls, what are we told is in those bowls? Not just plagues, but the wrath of God is finished in the pouring out of those bowls. So that's the conclusion of, so very much so in that last bowl, what phrase did we hear? It is finished. It is done. It is finished. So we have unveiled for us, or unfolding for us in that chart, you see what all is happening and how God is going to lay it out. And it hasn't happened yet, but I'm talking about, we're kind of talking in first person like we're standing there in it. Okay. This week, we're going to look at, and you were to do your homework and look at the times that John, it was said of John that he was what? John was, you looked at the, 4 different occurrences of John being
In the
Spirit. Thank you. And yeah, it's like I did the right homework, didn't I? Yes, John is in the Spirit. What is the significance of that? Now, I'm going to tell you in advance, don't ask the question exactly what does that mean, because I don't know that we can definitively or affirmatively or die on the hill of this is what it means if you're in the Spirit or not in the Spirit, okay? But we're going to see what happens when he's in the Spirit. What are the events? What does it mean? We're going to look at it as literally as we can, because remember, when you're studying prophecy, what are some of the rules?
You interpret it the way it says.
Yes, you interpret it or look at it and just view it as literally as you can, if you can view it literally. If it needs to be viewed figuratively, we have clues. What are those clues? If it says
Something like as is.
Like, as, those comparative similar terms or whatever that give us the idea that it might not be exact. It's something that's like something else. That's when we take things figuratively. But if we can take them literally, we take them literally. If something is described as, like, and I always use this one, trees clapping their hands. Trees don't have hands. And that's in the Psalms, I believe. But trees can't clap hands, but when you hear the sound of wind and tree limbs and they're kind of breaking up against each other, it sounds like the clapping of hands. Okay, so that's one of those times when you would take what is being said as figuratively, not that trees suddenly grow hands and suddenly clap. So that not being in Revelation. So Revelation being a book of prophecy, it's very important to understand what type of literature and how we need to approach it. As we looked at the things that John, and I say that partly because many times people are, I won't say dismissive necessarily, but put Revelation in a category of everything is figurative. Everything then becomes spiritualized. And basically, if you do that, you have the opportunity of it meaning anything you want it to mean. And it would be much better to see what God has to say it means. Okay, so that's what we've been trying to do as we go through this. So as we look at the times that John is in the Spirit, let's look at them. The first time is where? Right, the phrase is in chapter 1, verse 10, and it says, I, being John, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like the sound of a trumpet. Okay, so if he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, what transpired as a result of this time that he was in the Spirit?
You saw and heard Christ.
Yes, that's the very first thing, is he saw the voice behind him. He heard when he turned. The description, we're not told it's Jesus, but the description has to be and is Jesus. So we know in chapter 1 the things that he saw in that segment division primarily was the vision of Christ and what Christ revealed about himself. There's more, but at least that. So when you first see John in the Spirit on the Lord's day, the first thing he saw was Jesus and the description of Jesus. When we saw what was said in chapter 1 about this description of Jesus, we saw many of those descriptions somewhere else after that. Where was that? Do you remember? It was in part 1 when we went through the messages to the churches. In those letters, yes. As Jesus, who was talking to these churches through the angel that gave the message, the very first part was a description of Jesus. And almost every one of those descriptions went back to chapter 1. What John saw, what Jesus revealed about himself to John in that part, in that segment division, came into play in those messages to the churches. And it wasn't just like, the guy with a red sash, just some random point. It always, that part of the description of Jesus was extremely significant to the message to that church, right? As we looked at all of that. So, God is very clear, and God is very specific sometimes, and it's very important that His word, like we take heart in His words. Okay, so then the next part, after this time that he's in the Spirit, and after he sees the vision of Jesus, what is the next part of the book?
Chapter 4.
Well, chapter 2 and 3, before you get there, we're still in 1. But yes, the next part is what we just talked about, the messages to the churches, right? So when's the next time John's in the Spirit? You've already said it, same.
Yeah.
Chapter 4, verse 2. Okay, so if you would just look for just a second as a possibility of John was in the Spirit in verse 10 of chapter 1 all the way through and until chapter 4, verse 2. Okay, so there's a shift in chapter 4, verse 2. He's in the Spirit again. What happens this time?
He saw the throne.
He saw the throne to start with, yes. He is taken up to heaven. Okay, so in the Spirit on the Lord's Day in chapter 1, essentially, where was he? On earth. Yeah, and I don't know if with each message to each church, did he actually kind of visit that church? Because that would be a physical geographic change, right? If nothing else, he was made aware of and told to write down the things he was told were these messages to these churches. Okay? But in 4, there is a change of location. He leaves in the Spirit, he leaves earth, and he is in heaven. And then he tells us what he sees in heaven. Yes, first one that's sitting on the throne. There's a throne. There's one sitting on it. What else do we see?
Creatures and elders.
Yes, the living creatures, the 4 living creatures, the elders that circled the throne, and they're on their thrones. There's how many of them? 24, right. What other things does he see?
Flashes of lightning, sounds and peals of thunder.
Flashes of light and sounds and peals of thunder. The description of the one that's on the throne. He hears, what are things he hears? Not birds. That was good. On cue.
Yeah, angels are saying worthy or something.
The 24 elders are worshiping. The 4 living creatures are worshiping. At one point there's a group, it seems, of myriads of angels that are worshiping. He sees worship, 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 over and over again. And then, if the next time you see John in the Spirit is Revelation 17:3, is it possible that this in the Spirit experience that started in 4:2 continues to 17:3? So everything that's part of that second in the Spirit experience is encompassed.
Right, because he's seeing future. Yeah.
Yes, he started in 4
Yeah.
seeing things that haven't happened yet.
Right.
And he's taken to heaven. So in that experience, when he's not just seeing the throne of heaven, which he does, he begins to see as these seals and these trumpets and these bowls start occurring. He sees action happening. Things like the seals broken in heaven, but the action takes place on earth. So it doesn't mean that John goes back and forth, but if you notice, remember when it would say, when you were doing your pictures, I would tell you I'd put John off on the side and put it like an arrow coming out of his eyes, because it would say, I saw. John saw these events happen. And so he was an eyewitness account. He's writing it down. So from chapter 4, you go through the account of heaven. You see the seals broken. You see what happens on earth when those seals are broken. You see some groups of people mentioned. Remember some of the groups of people that John tells us about? 144,000. They're sealed on their forehead with the seal of God. You see, what else? Who else?
Earth dwellers.
Earth dwellers, those who dwell on the earth, the EDs, those who dwell on the earth. You see another big group,
She said,
the souls under the altar in the 5th seal in chapter 6, right? 6 seals in chapter 6. But in the 5th seal are the souls under the altar, and they're described to us. Those are good guys, right? They're ones that, well, life wasn't good for them in the sense of what we would say, because why are they there? Why are they in that category?
testimony of Jesus.
They were martyrs. They were martyrs for their testimony, right? They were killed because of their testimony. You've got the 144,000 sealed, and at that time, when we see them in chapter 7, they're sealed. This is after the seals have started to be broken. They're sealed on earth. That's a time on earth. And then you see the great multitude. Where are they? John sees them in heaven. Okay, so, and the great multitude have their own distinction and their own category. They come out of what time frame? The Great Tribulation, right? There's a first mention of the Great Tribulation. We see the 7th, I'm sorry?
The 2 witnesses.
Yes, later we see the 2 witnesses. That's in chapter, do you remember? 11. 2 witnesses, yes. 1 and 1. We're trying to remember some of these things, right? So as we see, 6 seals broken in chapter 6, trying to remember things. The 7th seal is broken in chapter 8, and we start seeing the trumpets sounding because they come out of that 7th seal, and there's 4 trumpets that sound in chapter 8. Chapter 9, we have the 5th trumpet. We have the beginning of the woes being passed. How many woes are there? 3 woes. And the 3 woes are attached to, or seem to be associated with which trumpets? 5th, 6th, and 7th. Right. So as each of those trumpets concludes, that woe is passed. So they seem to be connected to those. As the 7th trumpet sounds, we have kind of a time frame stopping in chapter 10. We see the strong angel with the little book. The strong angel stands with 1 foot on what? Earth and 1 on the sea. He gives the book to John, and John eats it, right? And it's sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach. And then he's told to continue writing. Now there's more that I've got to tell you. There's more that you've got to write down. There's more prophecy, more to come. Then we have those 2 witnesses. We have the first time we hear about a beast, because the beast does what to the 2 witnesses? He kills them. The whole earth rejoices. The earth dwellers rejoice because they've been tormenting. The 2 witnesses have been tormenting. And at the end of how many days? 3.5 days of their bodies lying dead in the streets, and everybody seeing that and giving gifts to each other and partying, what happens to them? They get up and they're caught up to heaven, right? And then there's a great earthquake, and that earthquake kills a tenth of the city falls? Is that what it says?
Yeah.
Or okay, and then what town, what city are we talking about? Jerusalem, because that's where their Lord was crucified. And it says, in that hour there was a great earthquake, and the tenth of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory. Then we have the 7th trumpet. And then we have, in chapter 12, we kind of have a pause, and we're looking at things, and we have 2 signs in heaven. What's the first sign? The woman. And the second sign is the great red dragon. And we have some time phrases. We had time phrases in 11 where the 2 witnesses have how long for their testimony? Well, we know, it's 42 months, right? So we have a time phrase of 42 months. We haven't yet put that in a timeline yet. But we've got to hold on to that, and we will put it in a timeline at some point. We have, though, in chapter 12, the woman is protected in the wilderness. She flees there, and she's protected in the wilderness. It tells us twice she's protected for how long? One time it says times, half a time. The other time it says 1,260 days. So we know those are the 2 same. That's the same time frame for her, because it's not 2 different times that she's protected. That's the same time frame, and now we know that 1,260 days is equal to time, times, and half a time, which is a phrase we get from Daniel, by the way, when we studied Daniel. But we know that 1,260 days equates to 3.5 years, or another phrase is 42 months. Is that the same 42 months of the 2 witnesses in chapter 11, or is it a different time? But it's the same amount of time. Okay, so that's key. But we're introduced to the dragon. We're introduced to a war in heaven. When that happens, we'll figure that out. I believe we will. Chapter 13, we're introduced to chapter 13, the bad, Friday the 13th bad. Helps us remember it, right? Who are we introduced to? The beasts. The 2 beasts. The first beast. First you see the dragon watching the first beast come out of the sea. Then later we hear about the second beast. The second beast is an associate of the first beast. What is his goal? What is his role in everything? The second beast. To point everybody back to the first beast, right? And ultimately to the dragon. Because who gives the beast power? The first beast. The dragon gives the first beast power. And so we see beast worship. We see dragon worship. We see the second beast who causes people to build what? He has them make what? The statue. Or the image. Sorry, the image. Yeah. The image of the first beast. And that image is caused to speak even by this second beast. So what are we seeing here? He uses what? Signs and wonders. So all the people now that are constantly looking for signs and wonders, that can be a very dangerous and scary thing, that they don't need to be just caught up in, because what do these signs and wonders do to people who dwell on the earth during this time? Deceives them, yes. Causes them to worship the beast and worship the image of the beast. It's very deceptive. It draws them in, and they are deceived. And they do worship. That is, so we see worship. We also see the mark of the beast, right? We see the image and we see the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is found where? Forehead or right hand. And the idea of this is, if you don't have it, what happens?
You can't
buy or sell. So the idea would be scary, causing people to get it because it is practical. It makes sense. And many are. But we find out later, what's the consequence of worshiping the image and getting the mark of the beast?
Death, you're forever lost.
Yes, you're forever lost. There is no redemption from that. Okay, so then we see in chapter 14, we see a group we've seen before. 14, 7, and 14. Remember? 144,000 again. Where are they now? In 14. And they're in heaven. They're with Jesus in heaven. They were purchased from the earth, it says. So we know that they're no longer on earth. But we see them again. And then we have just one angel after another angel after another angel giving statements, giving messages, seeing kind of a big, let's say, outline, overview of events that are coming that haven't happened yet. In chapter 15, what do we see? The 7 angels given the 7 bowls, and in the bowls are the plagues, and in them the wrath of God is finished, right? Very important thought, very important phrase. There's also more going on in this chapter, but that is the main thing. That comes out of that 7th trumpet, because that's where the 7th trumpet. And then we see in chapter 16, what do we see happening? All 7 bowls happening seemingly very fast. We don't know time frames always, but they seem to be happening very quickly. And in the 7th, as it's poured out, is the statement, it is done. And remember, I was saying there's only a few times that phrase is used. The first is at
3 or something?
I think it's 4. I said 3 last time, but then I realized it was 4. First time, but events. The first time is when creation is complete, and he says it is finished. The second time is on the cross when Jesus says to tell us that it is finished. And then the third time is here when the wrath of God is poured out and it's complete. It is finished. The next time you see it is in, yes, when New Jerusalem comes down. You see it. Okay, so in 16 we have all 7 bowls. And I went through all of those somewhat as a review, but I'm also showing you all that occurred from the second time John was in the Spirit. So all of that occurs. And he's in the Spirit the second time. He doesn't change locations, right? Okay. Next time you see him in the Spirit is where? 17:3. Okay. In the 17:3, it says, he carried me. Now, who's the he carried me? Which one? I mean, how is he described to us? He's one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls. The first one was associated with the voice like a trumpet, right? But here we have he being one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls carries John away in the Spirit. Now, all those bowls have already been poured out, by the way. But it says, we saw them poured out. But he's carried away in the Spirit into a wilderness. And there, John says, I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the rest of the chapter tells us about this woman. Who is this woman? Babylon. She's also called a harlot. Right. And it says here that she's riding on a beast. Right. She's riding on the beast. And it says the 10 heads? 7 heads are 7 mountains, that's in verse 9, on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. What's the significance of these kings? What's their goal? Their goal is one thing. They're given power for a little while to give that to the beast. They're given authority, so they give that authority to the beast. And the 10 horns, wait a minute, did I get that wrong? Okay, yeah, it's the next one. The 10 horns are 10 kings. They get authority to give the beast, sorry. Again, I was testing you to see if you're listening. It pays to read. That's their one purpose. Now, it also talks about what are they going to do in verse 14. Wage war against the land. Okay. Now, this is telling us about something that they're going to do, but it's not saying it's happening here. It's telling us about it, right? This woman is Babylon. This woman is the harlot. She's riding on the beast. But at the end of this chapter, what happens to her? She's riding on the beast, and the beast has these 10 horns, and these 10 horns represent 10 kings, and those 10 kings give their authority to the beast. What do the 10 kings and the beast do to her?
They break her up.
They rip her apart, they devour her, they destroy her, right? Okay, and she is what? I did say a harlot, but what else is she? She's Babylon. She is a city. So it's a representation. So again, taking something figuratively when you can, because it gives us the definition. It tells us what she is. She's the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. In her is the sin of all, or the blood of all the saints. The wine, and she's immoral. She's killed the saints. There's a lot encapsulated within the idea of this woman who is Babylon. Okay. And it's very clear that this is a city. So this whole evil group and conspiracy, it happens a lot of times. You get involved in something like that, and they'll turn on you. And you're so surprised that you participate. I'm not saying you have done this, but you see this, where you have someone who will gain a little power for a little time by associating with a group that's just mean and nasty. And then they're so shocked that it happens to them. You know, it's. I don't believe in karma, but sometimes you just kind of want to say karma. You know, what goes around comes around, sort of. Okay. Chapter 18, we see what? Babylon laid waste. We see the fall of Babylon. We see in 1 hour her judgment came. Babylon is this beast. I mean, the lady, not lady, harlot riding on the beast. In the previous chapter, we see people standing off from her and watching her, right? And what's going on with her?
They're weeping.
They're what? I'm sorry?
People were weeping.
People were weeping from a distance, and they're watching what happened to her. Watching her burn, right? So again, if this is figurative, you wouldn't be watching something figurative burn. You're watching a real city burn. And these are merchants, and these are kings, these are powerful people, because they had trade with her. They got rich from her. This was, they're sorry to see her destroyed, but they stand from a distance and watch it. And it really does happen. Happens quickly. Okay. So we have John in the spirit taken to the wilderness to see this woman in chapter 17. And this continues over to the next time that he is in the spirit. And what chapter is that? 21. Okay, so as we continue, you have the fall of Babylon in 18. You have in 19, what do you have? After the fall of Babylon, what do you have? You have the marriage of the Lamb. You have the great supper of God. You have the coming. This is the best part of 19. Who's coming on his white horse? Jesus. And who's coming on white horses behind him? His army. Isn't that awesome? Okay, but right before that, the part that sometimes we skip right past because I love getting to the part about Jesus coming, is this rejoicing in heaven because Babylon has been destroyed. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. It says over and over again. They're rejoicing. And it's not something that we tend to, like, we would think it would be a good thing to be glad about. But this is a huge event. If heaven is rejoicing about it and they have the perspective of God, this is a great thing. Okay, and then we see, it says, the marriage of the Lamb. Who has made herself ready for that?
His bride.
The bride. How, and what is she given? What is she dressed in? Fine linen, white linen, right? And then it says, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then you see the coming of Jesus and all that is described about him. But an interesting point in verse 13 is that his robe is dipped in blood. Okay, and you looked at blood. We're going to look at these words in a minute. And then you see this army that's assembled against him. That was what was mentioned back in chapter 18, right? These kings that are going to go up against the Lamb, right? And then we saw in the one of the bowls that was poured out, we see this in chapter 16, we see the 3 unclean spirits that look like frogs, right? And they're proceeding out of whose mouths? The dragons, the beast, and the false prophet, or his sidekick, the second beast. Those they come out, and what do? They gather the kings of the whole world. So you see the gathering of the kings. You see in 18 these kings, this army that are going to come, or these kings with the beasts that are coming, and then you see it actually happening in chapter 19. You're told about it, now you see it happening. Just like anything else. You don't just like poof, and an army is standing in front of a city. They have to be assembled. The alliances have to be made. You have to call up your forces. You have to get them there. And once they get there, then you see the event. And this event is Jesus coming on his horse in this wonderful description. We're just mentioned, and we're on the horses behind him. We're on white horses too. But we're on the horses behind him, and that we're his army, and we're coming up against this other army. And the other army includes the beast and the false prophet and the kings of the earth. They've been assembled for this very reason. But before this, the birds are told to what? Assemble for what? The great supper of God. What are the 2 birds told they're going to get to do?
Eat the flesh of men.
Eat the flesh of men, right? And drink their blood. So these horses, these armies are coming against each other, and what happens to them? How are they killed? The sword that proceeds out of Jesus' mouth kills them.
It's the word.
Yes. The word of God, sword proceeding out of Jesus' mouth, kills them. And what happens to the beast and false prophet? They're thrown into the lake of fire, right? And then the rest, meaning the rest of those armies, that's those kings and their assembled armies, are killed by the sword that comes from the mouth of him who sat upon the horse. And then it says all the birds were filled with their flesh. So that's the great supper of God. The birds were assembled for the great supper of God. This is the great supper of God. Okay, so then in chapter 20, what do we see?
It's taken down for 1,000 years.
Angel comes down from heaven and with a key, and he binds up Satan for 1,000 years. And what is happening as a result of Satan being bound for 1,000 years? What can he not do?
He can't deceive
He can't
people.
deceive anybody during that period of time. What's he been doing?
Deceiving people.
He's been deceiving people all this time. Now he can't deceive for 1,000 years. There's also thrones set up, and there's people that sit on those thrones, and judgment is passed, right? And then it talks about the first resurrection, this 1,000 years. And remember, as we've already said, and it's always good to repeat it, prophecy is to be interpreted literally when it can be, right? Is 1,000 years something that we can hold on to? Yeah. It is said something like 7 times in 5 verses or 7 verses. Do you think in the repeating of it, by God, he meant you to believe how many years? 1,000 years. Does anybody know why I stress that?
Because there are people who don't believe that.
What do they not believe? Do you know?
They don't believe in the literal 1,000-year reign.
Right. So they come up with something else. Either it's already happened, it's happening now, or we're going to bring it about, or that it's just figurative.
Or only for the Jews.
Or only for a certain point. Okay, that's another one. So even though we don't like to necessarily talk about all these other views, sometimes it's important to understand why I stress something. If it's said that however many times it is in that many verses, over and over and over again, I think God means how many years? 1,000 years. And this is a literal thing. Can it happen? Can Christ reign for 1,000 years? Can we reign with Christ for 1,000 years? Could Satan be bound for 1,000 years during that time? Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, just think about, I don't know what period of time you want to think about, whether it's current or in the past. You may not be in the middle of something very difficult right now. It might have been in the past, or something that you think could happen in the future. wouldn't it be great if whatever you are dealing with, it just wouldn't have happened because Satan isn't there to deceive? My prayer this morning for my situation is that conviction fall, truth be known. What is Satan the father of? Lies. And they're buying into those lies, and they're creating their own. They don't need his help. They do it very well because who's their father? The father of lies. Satan, God has nothing to do with lying. Lying is on the list of those who will never inherit the kingdom of God. Lying is not okay. It's not just not okay. It can define who you are. I'm a liar because I'm a sinner. I was born a sinner. But as a saved person, that process can stop. And I, as a saved person, am not to proceed as a liar. That is just not okay. So, 1,000 years. What happens after the 1,000 years? Satan was loosed for a short time. Does that kind of harken back to chapter 12? Kind of makes you think. But that might be a different time. This might be a different time. It's part of who he is. It's part of what he's about. But he's loosed for a time. There's 1,000 years. Think about this for just a second. Just let it rest on you. 1,000 years of no deception. 1,000 years of Satan not being able to do his work. Beast and false prophet are already in the lake of fire. And Satan's incapable of action for 1,000 years. What in the world, after 1,000 years, who would want this deception? Who would participate in that deception? But they do. And it says in verse 8, the nations that are deceived will gather from the four corners of the earth, and he'll gather them together for a war. And the number of them is like the sand of the seashore. So that many people are deceived. And it says, and they came up to the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. What city do you think this is?
Jerusalem.
Probably Jerusalem. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. So who fought that war?
God.
God. They came, God ended it. And the saints are preserved and the city is preserved. And it says, the devil who deceived them was then thrown where? The lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they're tormented day and night forever. Okay? This lake of fire, it says, does it tell us somewhere? Which was burned with brimstone. Okay, that lake of fire was not someplace that humans were ever supposed to go, but they will go there. They will. Okay, then what's the next event?
Great white throne.
The great white throne judgment. There's a throne. There's he who sits on the throne. Who is brought? There's only one set of people that are brought. Well, I mean, there's just unbelievers, yeah. Those, and even though it describes them in different ways, death and Hades and
Your name's not written in the
name
book.
not written in the book. That's the real key to the whole thing. Because books are opened. The books are opened. They're examined. And these people are judged according to those books. But the biggest criteria is, if your name's not written in the book of life, what happens to you? As a result of the great white throne judgment, what happens? They're all thrown into the lake of fire. Okay? So this is not where you want to be. So make sure that you're not.
At the great white throne judgment.
Right.
You don't want to be there.
Right. So then you have in chapter 21, after all of that, because this little statement that we can't forget to look at in verse 11 is so fast, little statement. It says, and I saw the great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and there was no place found for him. That brief, that little. So where are heaven and earth at that moment?
They're
Gone. Gone. Okay? They had been. All of this 1,000-year reign happened on earth. It happened on the earth as we know it. But at that time, when the great white throne judgment happens, heaven and earth fled away, and there's no place found for them. Okay? And then you've got this judgment. They're cast in the lake of fire. So what happens in chapter 21? New heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. Coming out of heaven, down to earth as what? How's she described?
As a bride.
As a bride. Yes, for her husband. Okay, so that New Jerusalem that had been brought down from heaven to earth, this new earth, right? And it was in this chapter that John is taken in the Spirit, right? In verse 10, it says, then he, who's the he? Not John, I mean John is carried away, but who carries him? One of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls. Could be the same one that we saw before, but it's one of that group. Carries John away, and what does he carry him? Is it in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me what? The holy city Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her brilliance was like a very costly stone, and is a stone of crystal clear jasper. Then it starts describing that, right? So this is the 4th time John's in the Spirit, and he changes locations, right? He sees a whole new set of things, right? So and we can go on, and chapter 21 and chapter 22 describe the New Jerusalem. Who is there? God and Jesus. There's no need for a son anymore because they are the light. They are the temple. They tabernacle with the people. And then in 22, it explains a little bit more, and it's over and over Jesus saying, I am coming quickly. I am coming quickly. I'm coming quickly. Again, he repeats it. So what does that give you? He's coming quickly. There's a certainty to that, right?
But our quickly, it's not his quickly.
Right. When we say quickly, we have an expectation of real fast. What he's saying is once this starts, it's happening really fast, right? And it's imminent. Do you realize there's not one thing other than once we get to chapter 4, after the events of those churches, there's nothing that needs to happen prophetically for any of this to start? There's nothing that's preventing it. God's timing. But I mean, and we can't bring it about. But we're not waiting on an event. We don't have to wait for a temple to be built. But will there be a temple built?
Yes.
Yes. There will be a temple. In Jerusalem at the old location. There are some things, when we get into parts 3 and parts 4, you're going to see some further filling in of the gaps a little bit in some of the prophecies of Old Testament and other places, Jesus speaking and all, that we're going to be able to understand some of this a little further. But there's nothing preventing, so any minute, how should we live?
It's to be ready. We need to be ready.
Any minute, be ready. If it happened right this moment, and you literally came face to face with Jesus, and he's everywhere, we should have that awareness. But when that real event happens, and he's right in front of us, and we're right in front of him, Paul says, I don't want you to be ashamed at his appearing. Now, we're not going to be ashamed that he appears. We're not going to be ashamed of his appearing. We don't want to be ashamed when we stand in front of him. You know that little child, I got caught, you know? We don't want, when our parents walk in the room as a little child, to have that fear of, did they catch me at what I was just doing? In a similar way, we want to live our lives moment by moment, every moment, without that fear of being caught at the wrong time. We want Jesus, another parable is, to be working, to be that faithful and diligent servant, being caught working, doing our tasks, doing what he wants us to be doing, what he's asked us to do. So, what would you say as a possibility now that we've gone through this of the in the Spirit, that the in the Spirit times could be? What could those times of in the Spirit be? Not something huge. We're talking about a tool of learning. If I were to go to my at-a-glance chart, what could I do with those? I can make them segment divisions of the book. We have one set of segment divisions that John was given in chapter 1, verse 19. This is a second set of segment divisions where the book is divided into these times when John is in the Spirit. So if you didn't catch that, do you see it now? Okay, good. So you could go back on your at-a-glance chart, and that's the reason I say on where it says segment divisions, I usually put more than one line so that I might find other ways to divide the book. Okay, this is another way, And all it is saying, okay, I'm gonna look at, why does it say John's in the Spirit and then the next time John's in the Spirit if I see that everything between them is part of that in the Spirit experience? And it makes sense, doesn't it? The first time he was in the Spirit, he saw Jesus and he saw the messages to the churches. The second time he's in the Spirit, he sees everything from seeing the throne of God all the way over to the next time, which is when he starts seeing Babylon and he starts seeing the harlot. He sees the destruction of the harlot, those other things that happen as a result, those other chapters, all the way up to 21. And now we see a totally different time frame in the book, right? Where we have all that past is done with. Now all we're looking at is the new heaven, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem. So it's another set of segment divisions. Okay, so the last part, or the bulk of your lesson, actually days, was taken up in looking up these words. And we can look at these. We're not going to put absolutely everything up here, but we want to see, you know, if sometimes, and it could be in these lessons, it could be in anything, if you are being told to do something, you just do it. I hope you do it. And you don't necessarily stop and ask the significance. I've told you before, if you go back and read the bold letters at the beginning, the bold words where she's talking to you, you might get an idea after the fact of why she had you do what she just had you do. And it says, those who give themselves the opportunity to understand Revelation under the guidance of the Spirit do not have to fear the future or be caught off guard by world events any more than the Apostle John was. Do you have a better understanding of the events of Revelation than you had 5 weeks ago, 5 years ago? Right? You do. You're becoming a little more familiar with it. We don't have every question answered, but you're becoming more familiar with it. When I say seals, trumpets, and bowls, you know what I'm talking about. You know why they were mentioned. We didn't make any of that up. Well, now we've looked at the in the Spirit times for John, and now we're going to look at these words: wrath, and woe, and earthquake, and plague, and blood, and see a little bit of what we could have seen. I tried to figure out a way that we could have done the in the Spirit part and plug these in there, but I felt like we would be real disjointed. So I kind of wanted to still keep them a little separate. But as we go, we want to stop and see what part are we talking about here. All of these words that we looked at are found from 4 on. So they're all found in the part that's what segment division? Third segment division, the things that will take place after these things. The things that haven't happened yet for us. They haven't happened yet, okay? So that's that time frame. Then so we're going to look at that, but we also know we're going to look at, each time we look through these, what in the Spirit experience was John having? Where was he in the giving of this revelation to us? In his experiences as he saw things. Okay. But we're going to look at wrath, woe, earthquake, plague, and blood. So if you get your lists out and however you wrote all these things out, so we can look at them together. And we can go kind of chapter by chapter. We'll try to do that so that we're not flipping back and forth too much, and then we'll fill in our chart as we go. The first word, wrath, is found in the verses 16 and 17. And what are we in? What event are we in when we're in? Well, in 6, what is happening in chapter 6? 6 seals and 6. So we're at the end of the chapter. What seal are we in? 6th seal. Okay. So we're in the 6th seal, and what do we learn about wrath?
People are trying to hide from what's going on.
So they're talking about, in chapter 6, they're talking about the wrath of God and the Lamb, right? And it's around what I just heard y'all talking about. They're hiding. 6 seals broken. They're wanting to be hidden. And they're talking about the wrath or the great day of their wrath, right? And that's during the sixth seal. This is chapter 6 is what the 6 is, but you can put all the reference 16 to 17. Hopefully you did that on your list. Always do your references so you can go right back to it, okay? But what is another word we find in chapter 6? Oh, I should have gone back to 5. What's another word we found in chapter 6?
Earthquake.
Earthquake. And what do we hear? Find it in what verse? 12. And then, again, what seal are we in? 6th seal. And so as the 6th seal is broken, what happens?
Sun goes black, moon goes blood.
Right. So we have this earthquake, and the sun goes, does it say it goes black, and the moon is like blood? Okay. Do y'all know that there's a blood moon coming up?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about this.
We've already had
And
one.
there will be 3 this year?
There's going to be 4 total. 4 total. They all fall on Jewish holidays. Coincidentally.
Yeah.
Right?
This year anyway.
This time, these blood moons. Well, the blood moons don't happen every year.
Right.
They don't happen very often. But whether you realized it or not, we had a solar eclipse recently.
Yeah.
What would you call the sun going black? Solar eclipse. And there's going to be a blood moon, and it's going to happen on the weekend of what would be Passover, or for us, it's the same time frame of Resurrection Sunday this year. Okay. Something to think about. Yeah. And if we were to describe this, if we were John and we said the sun goes black, more often than not, it might be cloud coverage for us, you know, like even a volcano erupting, but it also could be an eclipse. Okay, so there's an earthquake in the 6th seal. There's also, we'll put the 6th seal here too. We're kind of trying. And during chapter 6, John is in that second in the Spirit experience, because it's from 4 all the way to 17. But we need to go back to 5 for just a second so we don't go on. And we have, what word do we find in chapter 5?
Blood.
Blood. Okay, and what are we told about it? This is where Jesus, it says Jesus is, right, Jesus is worthy, and it's by his blood, right? That he purchased men, right? By his blood, worthy. Yeah, he purchased for God men from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. This is where we have the worthy are you to take the book, the song that's being sung, and that's about blood. Okay. But also in 6 we have blood, right? Mm-hmm. And what is that? This is the 5th seal. So you have the 5th seal, and you have those souls under the altar.
They're asking God how long will it take for him to
Right.
avenge them?
So it's avenge their blood, right? And they're told to rest for a little while longer and to wait, because
It's not finished.
their number is not complete. Yes, so that group's numbers have not yet been completed. So there's going to be more people whose blood is going to be spilled because of their testimony that are part of this souls under the altar group. Okay. Then we move to chapter 7.
We got another blood in
Another
6,
one in
12.
6.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Another one in 12, sorry. Another one in chapter 6 about blood, and it is in the 6th seal, right? And it's the moon became or is like?
Like.
Okay, moon like blood. Okay. I'm not saying that the blood moon we're going to see in a week and a half is this. I'm just saying it's going to be something like that. Okay, and this doesn't say the moon becomes blood, it says the moon is like blood, right? Okay, so that's one of those figurative statements. Okay, thank you for catching that. Now we move on to chapter 7, and what do we find in chapter 7? What?
Blood.
We find blood again, right? And what does it say?
Blood of the Lamb.
Okay, where are we? We're 6th seal has been broken, but the 7th seal hasn't quite been broken. John is in his second experience of in the Spirit, and then it's saying this group,
Came from the great tribulation.
right? So the great the great multitude, right, that came out of the great tribulation. So I'm just gonna put GM for great multitude coming out of the GT, great tribulation, and they washed their robes, is that what it says? Okay.
And made them white in the blood of the Lamb.
Which makes absolutely no sense if you've ever done laundry. Only makes sense in a spiritual sense, in the sense that Jesus' blood purifies us and washes away our sins and washes our robes clean. This is the basis by which, okay, so is it my blood?
No.
No, because my blood would stain it, right? It's Jesus' blood, and that's by which God looks at us. Now, I may not be part of the great multitude, but this is still true of us, that we're cleansed by the blood of Christ. It's through that sacrifice, right? Okay, so as I think that's all in 7. As we get into chapter 8, we see
Blood north.
John heard an eagle saying, woe, woe, woe.
okay, we have woe, which is the first category. Yes, so we have the 3 woes, or woe, woe, woe said, right, by the angel. And that's in chapter 8. We also see in verse 5, we see an earthquake, right?
And fire was thrown to the earth.
Okay, so we see, and this is after the 6th seal, before the 7th seal, but we have wait, am I right about that? Are we in chapter 8?
Yeah.
No, it's after the 7th seal, so I do want to get that up there. So we have the 7th seal, or we're in that time, and we have an earthquake. And other things other events surrounding it. And then in chapter 8, verses 7 and 8, we're in the first trumpet. We have blood. And in what?
Is the sea, a third of the sea becomes blood.
Okay, so that affects the sea, and it becomes blood, right? And we have the impact on animal life, and we have, it's not all of it becomes sea, right? A third of it, sorry. So a third of the sea, so that's in the first trumpet. In verse 8, what do we have? Second trumpet, and what happens?
More blood. The sea becomes blood. A third of the sea.
Oh, it does. Okay, so what did I get instead of earth? Sorry. I was wrong on this one. Okay, this is earth. I didn't doubt you. I was just wondering why I wrote the other. So a third of the sea in the second trumpet, the earth. It's thrown to the earth, and the earth, a third of the trees, a third of the green, all green grass is burned up, and a third of the earth is burned. So this is burned. Okay, that's where the impact on the sea becoming blood. Remember, if you go back, when those 7 seals, in the 7th seal, when the trumpets are given, there was an angel with a censer, and threw that censer fire down to earth. And so then as a result, many of those trumpets had to do with fire and had to do with blood over and over again. We see the significance of that. Okay, that's chapter 8. Going to chapter 9.
The first was cast.
Okay.
2 more are coming.
So we have first woe passed with 2 more coming quickly coming after it, okay? And that first woe is associated with the 5th trumpet, right? So the second woe is associated with the 6th trumpet, okay? What else do we see in chapter 9?
Plague.
We have, okay, there's 3 plagues, right? What are the 3 plagues?
Fire, smoke, and brimstone.
And we are in the 6th trumpet.
The third of mankind is killed.
Okay, so in the 6th trumpet, we have 3 plagues, and how much is
A third of mankind.
a third of mankind? Third of mankind killed.
Is a third of mankind what's left?
Probably, It's probably, we've already had some killed,
quarter
so
killed.
it's a third that's left, or it could go by the previous number, we're not exactly sure. But it makes more sense to me, whatever you do with that.
If a quarter's already dead, the
Yeah.
third of what's left.
Right. And when you start thinking about that, if you divide something into fourths, and a fourth is already gone, you have 3 parts left.
Right.
So if you went back to the whole, if it is what's a third of what's left, it would just be another fourth.
Another quarter.
But now how much do we have?
Half.
Half that's impacted. And then there's some places where it's like, you know, incident, like we don't know, like we might know the number 7,000 in the city, or we might know that many died, but we don't know numbers. But right now, we can, at that point, look at maybe as much as half of the original population is gone. It's amazing. But if it's a third of what was the beginning, that's more than a fourth. So that means a fourth and plus a third. And I'll let y'all do the math. Yeah, I can do it, right now I'm going, okay, let's move on. So that's chapter 9, and that's verse 18 was, and then verse 20.
The rest did not die, but they did not repent.
Okay, so the rest of the earth, where are we, over here, the rest didn't repent, right? Now, what were these plagues? It said, called them fire, smoke, and brimstone. Okay, so these are plagues as they're described here, or they're called here. We might call them something else, natural disasters or something like that, but they're called plagues here. Fire, smoke, and brimstone. Other times, there's plagues that are mentioned that are other things. So it's not just a generic term. It is a generic term, but it's not just when we say plagues, we mean one thing. A lot of times when we say plagues, what do we think of? Disease. Yes, bubonic plague or something like that.
Locust,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
flood.
Or if you think of plagues, it might take you back to Exodus and you think about those frogs and those gnats and things like that that happened and all those plagues in Israel. Okay. Anything else in chapter 9? So in chapter 10, what do we have? Nothing. None of these words at least, right? Okay. Chapter 11. A lot. Okay, first we have, if we're going to go from left to right, not in order of verses, we have 18, which is what? The wrath. Okay, the nations were enraged. Okay, where are we in, we're in John's second experience, but we're in the 7th trumpet, right? So we have the 7th trumpet, and it's saying God's wrath came, right? The nations are enraged. It's really talking about a time. It's saying, it's a time statement of, at this point, the nations are enraged. Your wrath came. The time came for the dead to be judged. The time came to give their reward to the bondservants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, the small and the great. And, you could say, and the time, but to destroy those who destroy the earth. There's a lot of time has come. The time has come. The time has come. And that happens in the 7th trumpet. And remember what is associated with the 7th trumpet. The 7 bowls are coming out of the 7th trumpet. So that's what it's saying. In those bowls, some of this is going to be happening. It's giving just a kind of a sort of a broad overview of some of the things that are happening. But that time came as the 7th trumpet is blown, which is the 3rd woe, because the 2nd woe is past. Okay, what else happens in 11?
The second woe is past and the third is coming.
Okay, so 2nd woe. Which was also the 6th trumpet. And the 3rd woe is coming, it says, right? And the next thing is the 7th trumpet. Okay, so we have the 2nd woe is past. Then we also have in verse 13, what? An earthquake. And this is again a time phrase, in that hour. What happened that it's saying in that hour? The 2 witnesses. Yeah, this is when the 2 witnesses are taken out. This is all in the end of the 6th trumpet.
Yeah,
So you have the 6th trumpet. And I'm going to put the 2 W's, the 2 witnesses. are taken up to heaven, and there's an earthquake, right?
A tenth of the city fell.
And a tenth of the city fell, and as a result, 7,000 are killed. And that's a very localized earthquake. It's just in that city. Some of these earthquakes are much bigger than that, but this seems to be very localized. Okay, and in verse 19, what do you see? About an earthquake. Right.
Temple was open.
Yes. So we have, again, the seventh trumpet has been blown, and God is in the temple, or no, this is when the temple is open, right?
Yeah.
What do we see?
Lightning, thunder, earthquake, hail.
Okay, we see the Ark of the Covenant though, don't we?
Ark of the Covenant appeared.
But we have the earthquake and we have lightning. Notice that lightning and thunder and sometimes hail seem to be associated with these earthquakes, right?
Weather.
Yeah. We have in the impact. You know, when a tsunami hits, it's usually an underground earthquake out in the ocean floor. It's not just a big old tidal wave. It's as like a repercussion of that comes in, and so other things happen. Volcanoes erupt when an earthquake. There's a lot of other impact when there's an earthquake. Unsettling everywhere. Okay, so that's kind of similar. What else do we see in 11? Plague. What do we see about a plague? Okay, so the two witnesses, we are in chapter 11, right? So we've got plague. We have the two witnesses, and they can perform any plague.
Right.
For anybody, why? Why are they performing these plagues? Why are they doing this? Against who?
People that are hurting them.
People that come against them, yes. So they can smite the earth with every plague as often as they desire. How long can they do this? How long is? Yes, 3.5 years, and it specifically says 42 months. Okay, so that's their period of prophecy. And during that time, they can strike down anybody who comes against them, and they can strike the earth with every plague. And when you realize that, you turn my page in my Bible, if your Bible page is turned, but you see where they're killed by the beast, and everyone rejoices. Why do you think that is?
Because they couldn't do this anymore.
Yes, they can't do this anymore. There are no more plagues, all these things that they were capable of doing. It's not just like two men are standing there and we're here in the United States and we don't care. You know, it doesn't impact us. Apparently, they're able to impact worldwide. Exactly. So that is 11:6. And then also in 11:6, blood, right? Oops, I turned my page the wrong way. Okay, so the two witnesses can turn water into blood. Not like blood, to blood, right. Again, that should maybe remind you of what happened back in Egypt.
Yes.
When the water was turned into blood, the Nile was turned into blood. This is something, and we've seen it in some of the other, in the seals and trumpets and bowls. We've seen the sea becoming, at least a portion of it becoming blood, and then later more and more. Okay, so that's 11. Chapter 12. Again, going from left to right.
Wrath.
We have wrath, okay.
The devil's right.
Woe to the earth. Who has wrath now?
Devil.
Okay, so we have the devil coming to earth,
For a short time.
and he has a short time coming to earth. For a short time, and he has wrath. So it's saying, rejoice, O heavens. Why? Because he's leaving, and he's coming to earth for a short time. But it says, the next category is, woe to the earth, right? Because woe, because the devil has come down to you. So again, he changes locations, he impacts where he was and where he's going, okay? And then there's blood, okay, in verse 11, right? Okay. You have to let's back up to 10 for just a second. It says, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them before our God day and night. And they, who would they be? The brethren. They overcome him because of the blood of the Lamb. So the brethren overcome the devil, or the dragon also, by the Lamb's blood. You can have put a whole lot more on your chart. We're just trying to cover this. I'm just trying to get some highlights up there. And you could have written out the verses. You could have done whatever you needed to do to record all this. Okay, in chapter 13, we don't have anything for our list. Chapter 14, what do we have? Sorry, Donna.
Wrath.
We have wrath. Okay.
The ones that take the mark.
Okay, those who take the mark of the beast, we have to back up to 9, or worship the beast, or his image, they will do what? Okay, so if you worship the beast and the image and take the mark, you will get what? The wrath of who?
God.
The wrath of God, right? So remember earlier when we first mentioned chapter 13 and talking about worshiping and taking the mark is going to allow you to buy and sell. So it's practical. It makes sense. People of the earth are going to have no problem with that. People of today probably wouldn't have a problem with that if it was to be today. But it is a problem because ultimately what's the problem with it? If you take that mark, you're going to receive the wrath of God.
Lake of fire.
And eventually, yes, ultimately, the lake of fire. Yes, Sandy?
I want to hear something funny. The other day I got a new American Express card
Yes.
with a chip in it.
Yes.
And I can't use it unless I have that card
Right.
to buy and sell.
Yes. Yeah, that chip, but that thankfully so far is not in our forehead or our hand.
But that is supposedly coming.
It's supposedly coming. We hear a lot about this where I even saw the video the other day, but they were putting it in our left hand. I was sitting there going, wrong hand. not bad, but you know, the video I saw on Facebook was somebody having one injected. Now from the perspective we saw it, because we were looking this way, it looked like it was her left hand.
Yeah, but the scary part about it is that if you do this study and you know the word, you know this.
Yes.
But how many people don't know, and they're so deceived. Oh, what a wonderful thing! I'm gonna have this chip on to carry it on my phone. I have to do all this. I've got this chip. I'm gonna do all this.
Well, and
scary.
There's baby steps, like Sandy's talking about a chip on her card. Okay. Total aside, word of warning. If you have that in your purse or your husband has it in your wallet, you can cover it with aluminum foil, or there are certain wallets that are doing that because they can come by with a device that's no bigger than like an iPad.
Yep.
And they literally can just walk past you and scan that chip. And I've watched this on television where the guy was, and they're claiming it's not going to hurt anything, it's better, because I just got a credit card with that on there too, it's not American Express. But he showed just doing that. There was somebody walking in sitting in a food court, and he just walked past them like this. Their purse was hanging. Didn't touch the purse. Didn't have to get inside. He goes over in the same food court, has a computer, and has a device, and he takes a hotel key card to get in a door. Has a strip on it. Magnetic strip,
They
right?
can do it with your car too.
What's that?
They can open your car too. There are the sensors that.
Oh, I didn't think about that. But he took this hotel key card with this extra device that he had set right there with that scanned information, and with this thing he was able to not just swipe the card to read from it, he was actually able to put that information from your card onto that card. And he walked into a McDonald's that was right there at the food court and used a hotel key card with that person's information on it and was able to buy something right then. And it took him 5 minutes. to do it, no time whatsoever. And he's sitting there saying, it's not just possible, it's going to happen. So just so you know, and I don't know, up to now I don't think any of us, I was looking at our cards, they usually have a Wi-Fi symbol on them, or something like that on your card if you have that chip technology. But we've already seen, like Johnny has his cards, but he had several debits on a card one time, and I do look at his card, had several debits, he's in airports a lot, and somebody was washing a car down in Florida, and I'm like, did you get a rental car? Did you go do a car wash? He goes, no, I wasn't in that town. So we got those taken off. Yes.
On YouTube, there's a video of Matt Lauer and Katie Couric
Right.
doing a news piece on it,
Right.
saying it was coming out in 2017.
Now, what's coming out? The chip?
The chip in the hand.
Yep.
And they posed it in the beginning, they posed it as, imagine yourself in an accident and you're far from home and you don't have any idea, well, thanks to a chip in your hand,
Right.
you're gonna be able to get health care.
Well, okay, again, that's a great Matt Lauer and Katie Couric, I'm saying it for the video. We're doing a news piece on it saying that if you have a chip in your hand, that they can identify you. You don't have to have identification on you. What a great thing. Just like our pets.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Prior to that, I had even heard years ago about implants like this in cattle, so that when they're going to like a cattle yard to be sold, they just pass by and they're scanned as they pass by. The count is there, the inventory's there, all the identification. We had the tags on animals for a long time, but that was more of a literal tag. But this chip technology has been out there, and why not? Look what a wonderful thing it is for our pets to be identified. It's shown for all this time that it's not bothering them at all. It won't bother you at all
And
either.
it's going to be
for
for
us
our
to
children.
and we don't know that chapter 13 is saying that's how it's going to happen. In the past, we might have thought of as tattoo, like the Holocaust victims, were tattooed with a number to identify them. In a similar way, it could be a tattoo, or it could be this technology. And if you think about that, if that's the case based on what we're hearing, all you'd have to do is in a store, instead of swiping your card, you just swipe your hand. And your ability to buy and sell, it's not just that it will be debited out of your account, but that it would be identifying you as someone who can buy. Yes, Barbara?
It was also mentioned at one point for your medical care.
All your medical
But
information.
it all goes back to, once that chip is in, they have the ability to track you
Yes.
wherever
constantly.
you are forever.
Right. Yes. So, let's just say
Big brother.
next week, let's just say a month from now, and I think there's many other events that have to happen, but let's just say, and you right now knew that if you refused that you could no longer buy or sell overnight.
Or get medical care.
Or medical care, you're right. Health insurance, all of your ability to function in our society as we know it.
Your government
Ominous.
paycheck.
Yeah.
What'd she say?
Government paycheck.
Your Social Security.
What
Oh,
we
that's right.
count on. Yes.
This is, however it happens, it's gonna really require faith in the Lord, the system of, the kingdom of God, instead of mankind. And
Right.
because what if, people are gonna come up and say, well, my baby needs medicine.
That's
I'm
right.
gonna take that mark because of my child, and make it sound like, they're doing some good thing for their family. But
Right.
we have to really understand and trust in God and in what we're studying
Right.
today.
So the warning is there.
Yeah.
Because like we just wrote up there, if you take the mark in whatever form, if it's this chip technology, we don't know. But if you take the mark, then you are going to incur the wrath of God, or going to receive the wrath of God, and ultimately, as Sandy said, be in the lake of fire. So yes, temporally, here on earth, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard.
So the devil is working overtime because he knows.
Because he only has a short time.
Yes, during that time. Oh yeah, he knows he only has a short time. He's read this book.
He knows the ending.
Now he's read this book and thought he could make his throne equal to God too. There's an arrogance beyond anything we can understand here. He probably thinks he can thwart all this, but I just want you to understand, and I've told you before, I haven't told you in a while, be aware as you study this, you basically are putting a target on your back.
That's
Because the more knowledge you have of his ways and what's going to happen, the more of a target you're going to become. Expect spiritual warfare. Expect things are going to get hard. Expect individuals, and expect the greatest, most concentrated attack on you is going to come from so-called Christians. That's who you're going to get. Probably the world a lot of times just don't care and leaves us alone.
They don't know.
But people who claim they're Christians but don't want to believe this and are going to have their own way of looking at things are going to be the ones that argue the loudest with us. I think I was talking to Ann a little while ago about...
Because you're nuts when you start talking about something like this.
Right.
I mean, they just think, you're so wacko, you're
Right,
out there. You know,
right.
And it's a good thing.
It's not going to happen. My God, I had somebody say something this past week about my Jesus is so much cooler than your Jesus because he just accepts everybody, and I bet he even has a couple of tattoos.
Oh.
Yeah, one in his hand and one in his hand.
That's exactly what Johnny said. He's got two, but they're not really tattoos. They're
Right.
marks.
Yeah.
He's got marks. Well, and the reason she was writing it is because there was a picture of a church in Knoxville that had out on their sign. It said, and I'll get this right, something like, remember that Satan was the first to demand equal rights.
Yeah.
That's a true statement, isn't it? It was on WBR, had posted it, but she was reposting it and making her own statement about it. And this is a young girl who I like, but she's living in immorality. She is very vocally supportive of the gay and lesbian agenda, and that's what she read this sign to mean. Because I even said to her in a comment, I said, I don't understand what your comment has to do with what they said. And I just explained that Satan did demand equal rights. He thought his throne could be equal to God's. He was wrong, but he still thought it, and he still said it, and he still acted on it. So I just took the literal approach and said, I don't really understand. And she goes, well, I think that they're talking about, I assume this is about, I said, be careful in assuming. Yeah, when you assume, you make an A blank blank out of you and me. And I said, and then she said, and they're just misinterpreting Satan's message. And I'm like, be careful considering what this church is or isn't saying, because I don't know what they're saying. What their sign said was true. Satan demanded equal rights, and he was the first to do that. So I just took it from that. I just took the literal and said, I think we should just read the Bible and see what God has to say. But she wants to believe that she can live her life how she's living it and be a Christian. And if she screams me down, she doesn't really, but you know, if she's louder than me and she's so firm in her beliefs and she's a Christian too and you can't tell she's not, I'm not saying she is or isn't, I just know her life is not proving it. And the witness that she has to this guy that she's with that's unsaved is not a true witness. It's confusing. And she's so much more open-minded is why he likes her so much. And in her open-mindedness, she won't talk to you about I won't talk to you about gays and lesbians because I know what you believe in. I just won't even talk to you about it. She's so up on her high horse. Is that high horse if she is in front of the great white throne? What's that high horse going to do for her? Yeah, it's going to be puny. What is in the books is the basis, not what you are firmly believing in or what you want to assert, and how you declare Jesus is okay with homosexuality, and Jesus is okay enough to get tattoos because he's so much cooler than my Jesus. You know, I left the tattoo thing alone. You know, I wanted to say, and does your Jesus live in a sexually immoral relationship with an unwed situation with a child? No. No. But does he love people that are right there and they can get saved out of that? Absolutely. Absolutely. No one's sin defines them as a sinner any more than the other person's sin. But does he leave you there? No. And once you're saved, when he's written his law on your heart and your motivation is now from within to without and it's going to show up in your actions, do you stay that way? No. No. But he loves us exactly where we are. That's the reason we don't clean up our act to get there. That there's no works that get us to salvation. At the point of salvation, whether I'm just a little bit of a liar, or whether I'm a horrible, horrible child molesting, lying murderer, you know, whatever big picture you want to put out there, drug addict or whatever else. The bottom line is, I'm a sinner. That's the bottom line. Any sin caused me to be deserving of the lake of fire ultimately, but hell right now. And that sin is what Jesus died for. That place that I was when I got there, as Paul says, such were some of you. He didn't say such are some of you. He said such were some of you. And he lists some big ones. And Paul says, no one is a greater sinner than me. He killed Christians. You know, he said nobody was a greater sinner than me. Jesus knocked him off the horse, well, something like that. Got his attention, blinded him, led him blind into the people that should have killed him because they should have been afraid of him. And yet, what did they do? They came and gave him the message. And as a result, the greatest evangelist of all time came out of that. And God spoke to him directly. So, in the situation that I described, I like this young woman, but I don't like her life. And I don't agree with her when she describes her Jesus. Because that Jesus is not this Jesus.
It's cheap grace.
It's cheap grace. It is.
And I was
Cheapening
reading about
grace.
that the other day, and about what, and from Hebrews, and what that
Yes.
that means. And people, they think they can live the way they want.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got children like that.
And it's hard.
And it breaks my heart,
Breaks your
because
heart.
you can't live like, you can't choose the way you want to live and think, oh, this is, I'm saved, I'm good, grace covers it. No.
Well,
Because
and
you're cheapening God's grace.
You're cheapening God's grace. I sometimes say we try to outmercy God.
Right.
We try to decide that we like them and we really don't want to think that they're not, therefore we're going to kind of redefine what God has to say. That's not.
No,
No.
it's heartbreaking.
It's also creating your own image of Jesus. You're creating your own idol.
Right.
You have formed Jesus out of wood or whatever, clay or whatever. And I'm gonna tell you something personally. If I were out somewhere and, you know, Cindy's known me for a while, Carolyn's known me for a while, and they were saying, oh, this is Peggy, and then they start telling things about me that might be good things, you know? But I'm 42 years old, not 52 years old.
That'd be a lie.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. This is my point. Is that I'm standing right there and you start describing me as being from, I don't know, some other state besides here, not a Southerner, have this wonderful cultured voice, not a Southern accent with the y'alls and the nakeds in there and everything else. Or that, you know, I'm self-made woman, millionaire. I mean, whatever, none of the things that are true about me, I'd be looking at you going, who are you describing? And you could look at me and go, you? And I'm like, it's not me. I don't want you to have to project an image of me that makes me look better than I am. I want you to see me for who I am and love me for who I am, not try to clean me up and make me a better version of me. Jesus doesn't want that either. Don't try to make a better version of Jesus. He's pretty good, as he is. Not just pretty good.
He's perfect.
He's perfect.
Perfect.
And he's the image we are to become. We're not to make him in our image. That's idolatry. That's idolatry. So be careful of that. Not saying it's you, but that's what we're encountering more and more in this world, is they will accept Christianity if it's the way they want it to be, which means they get to do whatever they want. They get to live their lives however they want. But understand the other side of that statement that I said earlier about I'm a sinner, my sin, this person's sin, any person's sin is how God accepts me at that moment. I don't clean myself up. I couldn't. He then washes me, cleanses me. As we said before, we wash our robes in his blood and they become clean, not in my own. I'm nasty, filthy, showing up. He actually exchanges robes with me so that his righteousness is what I take on, and my righteousness I hope I bury out there in the field somewhere, and it's gone and I never go dig it up again. He casts it away from me as far as the east is from the west. You know, I love all of that, but the other side of that is there is no little bit of sin that lets you squeak in. You don't get to be a lesser sinner than somebody else and get into heaven. That's not the basis. Yes, Cindy?
It's confusing for me, maybe not to anybody else, but it's in chapter 22.
Mm-hmm.
Behold, I am coming quickly, and my rewards to every man according to their deeds. What does he mean by that, by the deeds?
Okay. Well, when Jesus comes, at his coming, what two categories of people is he going to see when he comes? Saved and unsaved, sinners and others that are redeemed, right? Those are the two broad categories. Not
I
talking
thought all the sinners were gone.
Well, and you know what?
The people that were in heaven with him.
Hang it in there, and you're going to see, because that's something that I didn't see the first time I went through it. So hang in there. So at his appearing, at his coming, he's going to see both types of people, sinners and well, I'm not going to say sinners. Saved and unsaved. I like Martha's way. Saved and unsaved, right? Okay, so the deeds of the unsaved, what category do they all fit in? Less than perfect, right? Less than righteous. They're the deeds, the unrighteous, we might consider them our righteousness. And God says our righteousness is as filthy rags. A very graphic term, menstrual cloths. Used menstrual cloths. That's the idea of filthy rags. Something that a man might even put around his loins, and it's nastified, and then it's been buried in a cave for a long time, and so it's putrefied. That's how God views our good works. Okay? So the deeds that they would be rewarded for, or their reward, or their deserving, is all bad, right? But what about those that are saved? What deeds do I have? I have my prior salvation deeds that are covered, taken care of. God doesn't care about those anymore. My saved walk, I'm going to have some that are done in my flesh. And I'm going to have some that are done in his righteousness. Those I might receive crowns for, rewards for. The other, you've seen me do this picture, some of you have, of I have this image of me. You know, I'm going before the Bema seat, I'm walking down through there, and there's a whole line of people, and I'm just way down with all this great and wonderful stuff that I've done. I've got a cart I'm pulling behind me, because I've done so much for God. I'm so awesome, I'm so incredible, right? But as I pass through the fire of judgment, and there will be a fire of judgment for good people, all of that hay, wood, and stubble is going to be burned up. And all I'm going to be left with is the gold and precious stuff, precious stones that got through the fire, which would be my righteous acts, those done in the spirit, not in the flesh. That's what I approach the throne in. You notice I go from, I'm hauling this load, to I have a few things in my hands, is probable. And when I approach the seat, I'll be rewarded for those. But how did I do those?
Through him.
Through him, not me. So what might I do?
Keep it low.
Cast him. Because it's him, not me. Okay, so the rewards are that kind of idea. Okay, good and bad. Notice in the New Testament it tells us that we will be judged for every word that proceeds out of our mouths.
Yeah.
And I hang tightly to the idea there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So that's why I love that picture of passing through the judgment, because that stuff is burned up already. If I still carried that all the way up to the Bema seat, he would say, why do you have all that stuff? Instead, all we focus on is the positive. The Bema seat is a Bema seat of the laurel wreath. It's the Olympic stand where you're given your gold medals or your silver medals or your bronze medals. It's a positive thing. Great white throne is not. That judgment is not. It's not a good thing at all. Okay, very, very distinct. We'll get into who's who where. I think we probably could continue, but I hope that you've gotten all your lists done, and we kind of need just to end. But go through all of those verses. Put things in their categories. And the main thing is, what are you learning? You're learning there's earthquakes at significant times. Some of those earthquakes are localized. Some of them are big general. One of them was so big that what did it do?
Some of them are hail, 100 pounds.
100-pound hailstones are associated. But well, there's an earthquake that moves every mountain and every island out of its place, right? That's worldwide. The plagues the two witnesses are able to do can impact the whole world or impact an individual that comes against them. Plagues aren't always disease. Plagues might be fire, brimstone, and smoke, right? Even in earth. Blood, all of these plagues that come out of the 7 bowls, every one of those are plagues. Everything that happens out of those bowls. Blood and fire and all of that stuff that happened in the trumpets. Just put them in the right. The blood, going through the blood is really cool because it's avenging their blood. People are killed, but also, and the moon's becoming like blood, but we wash the those that come out of the great tribulation, the great multitude, have washed their robes in blood. It's always important to understand context and understand that that's talking about a specific group of people, but there can be an application to us. We can look at it and say, keep it in context, interpret it correctly, but we have our robes washed in his blood. But also, he's going to have blood on his robe all the way up. When he's riding on a horse, he's going to have blood on his robe at his appearing in chapter 19. And we have the reference back in those angel talking. It talks about the one who does the sickle. And the sickle gathers the grapes for the winepress of the wrath of God, if you did your wrath statement on that one. And he's going to tread the wine. Would that be the blood that's on his robe when he comes in chapter 19? What is that winepress? It's judgment. It's a bloody battle. Remember, the blood is up to the horse's bridle. Okay? So if you were sitting on a horse and you had a robe, you're Jesus, you had a robe, and there's blood on his robe, and you've just come through where the blood was at a horse's bridle for 200 miles, would it affect your robe? Your robe would look like it's been dipped in blood. Okay, so start connecting some of these things if you can. Okay. Anyway, continue on. We will do lesson 9 for next week, and in lesson 9, I looked at it before. You're starting to do some chapter studies. You're going to do chapters 11 through 16, 6 chapters. She'll guide and direct you. Chapter studies are where you look at one chapter, see the key repeated phrases, maybe make some lists if you start seeing a phrase, a word that she's directed to you before, like if there's blood or wrath or something like that, you know, anytime God, Jesus, or the Holy Spirit are mentioned, those are always key phrases, even if it's only once. Those kinds of things. And you'll start seeing, this is where we've come from flying really, really high. We're starting to lower. We're starting to see more than just the lay of the land. We're starting to pick out details as we look at our study. But you got a new thing this week, which is that you saw that there are segment divisions beyond chapter 1, verse 19. You see the In the Spirits with John. And we had a good time kind of running through the book again. As the more we go through it, the more we pick up and understand. I hope you feel like you're starting to turn a corner and you're starting to get a little more of a grasp of the book. Hang in there. We've got, what's that?
Repetition.
Repetition helps. This is only part 2 of 4 parts, so can you imagine? Once you get this established and once we start putting things on timelines, we're starting to do charts and things, that is so helpful because it starts putting things kind of in their place. Hopefully you'll get some of this more and more, and it'll help. All right, we'll pray and we'll go get our food and we'll watch the video. Gracious and